I would like to welcome you all. Happy New Year. We're going to, first of all, I'd like to thank the International Operating Engineers for allowing us to use their space again, donating their space for us to hold our meetings. And Sister Jean is going to lead us with prayer.
So we just kind of relax into this moment a little bit. We could all use a little relaxing and take a couple of good breaths. Get in touch with that deeper place in you where the divine resides. Giver of all good gifts, we know we are gathering tonight in your presence. You're with us as we move forward into this new year. We count on your grace, your love, your support and guidance as we continue on this journey for justice, for all who are now or will be in the future affected by the radioactive waste in this urban landfill. We have heard again calls and pledges from our federal servants for more testing at West Lake, of what is yet to be done prior to appropriate action being decided, let alone taken. Assurances have been made again and again that our best interests are uppermost in concern. Grace us all, Holy One, and guide all those who are in decision-making positions that affect our lives, so that proper action accompanies these fragile assurances, and that the pattern of delay and obfuscation is soon broken in the name of all in this region. Let this whole matter be turned over to FUSRAP, to the Army Corps of Engineers, who know how to handle what's here. We ask your wisdom. Grace us with it in abundance, that we can draw from among us what we need to bring about the changes we know must be made here in Bridgeton and here in West Lake. Let us in your spirit be strong for each other. Let us appreciate and support the enormous efforts that our official and unofficial community leaders continue to make in our behalf. And let us see the day soon when the burden of this sorry business at the landfill is lifted. When your light replaces what is dark and hidden here. And we are finally freed of the worry and effects of this radioactive waste barely sequestered in our community. So that, like Martin Luther King, we can finally say, free at last, Lord God Almighty, from this radioactive menace in our midst, we are finally free at last. Amen.
That would be nice. Okay, we have a lot to talk about tonight, so we're going to get started. I want to introduce or recognize any elected officials that would like to be recognized this evening. If you could just stand and say your name, please.
Good evening. Councilman Norm Ray, Maryland Heights.
Linda Eaker from Bridgeton. Smitty Norris from Bridgeton. Amy Tucker from St. Anne.
my wife, Kathy. Operating engineers, union hall managers.
I'm Linda Henry. I am a representative here for our new county executive, Stephen Stanger.
Anyone else?
They're not elected, Donna.
Okay. We also have with us Dr. Mike Fulton from Pattonville School District and Tim Baker with SSM Health. And of course we have the Franciscan Sisters of Mary with us as usual. Are there any other businesses that would like to be recognized? Okay. Well, most of you know I'm Karen Nickel with Just Moms STL. I am one of the moms that work tirelessly to get our community cleaned up and making sure we provide the safety and protection that our children and families need from the nuclear weapons waste and the smoldering fire at the landfills. To find out more information on Just Moms STL, you can visit our Facebook page, and you can like us on there. That would be great. I am also the treasurer of Just Moms STL, and I would like to report our year-end financial information for December 31st, 2014. We collected a total of $4,666.40 in donations. We had expenses of $1,726.74, leaving us a balance of $2,939.66. We also have $520 in our GoFundMe account, which does not reflect any of that. We have not touched that money, taken anything out, or done anything with that as of right now. We are close to reaching 3,500 members on our West Lake Landfill Facebook page. We have also finally gotten everyone's email addresses, and you should have received an email invitation about this meeting a couple of days ago. If you did not, it may mean that we have your wrong email address or we don't have it. You can check with Megan Beckerman in the front out here, and she can look it up and see if we have you listed. I want to remind everyone to make sure that you fill out the Bridgeton Landfill survey. It's that green piece of paper. A lot of you have already filled it out. You can find it on our West Lake Landfill Facebook page, pinned at the top of the page, and we did have some copies that you could fill out, but I don't know if we still have blank ones, if we still do or not. Make sure that you're filling those out. That information is very important, not only for us to track right now, but you can list your symptoms, your illnesses, the quality of life, if you ever need to refer back to that years from now or whatever the case may be. So if you get a chance, please make sure that you fill that out for all of your family members. There is going to be a St. Louis FUSRAP community meeting on January 29th. That will be an oversight meeting to discuss cleanup efforts going on with the radioactive waste in North County. I would encourage everyone to try to attend that meeting. That will be on January 29th at 7 at the Hazelwood Civic Center in Hazelwood. Did everyone get a postcard, or 2 postcards actually? 2 white little postcards? Okay, those postcards are for you guys to fill out so that we can send them to Senator McCaskill and Senator Blunt. And I'm sure you've all read them by now, but it's to request transfer of full jurisdiction of Westlake out of the hands of the EPA and over to the Army Corps of Engineers. And we also want our senators to help us get a meeting with Gina McCarthy. We have the top cop of the state going after what is right for us. We need the top cop of the EPA to do the same. We're done messing around. We want the top dog. Let's see. Odor. odors. Please continue to log the odors. I know it's tedious, I know it's time consuming, I know it's aggravating, and I know that if every single person was logging the odors, there would be a lot more. So we have found out that you can leave a message after hours. If you call the phone number up there, you do have the ability to leave a message with the information. We are trying to work on an easier application to be able to get in, maybe a mobile app or something to get in to be able to log that information a little bit easier. We do have our red bucket here. If anybody wants to make a contribution, we'll have it out up here on a thing, or my daughter will walk around with it. And with the odors, the AG he sees those odor reports. We need to make sure you're doing those. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn to talk about the AG.
Hello everyone, my name is Dawn Chapman. I'm another mom that part of Just Moms STL that works behind the scenes here with the landfill situation. As Karen mentioned, with the Attorney General, I know there's been a lot in the news right now. There is an ongoing lawsuit. The Attorney General is suing on behalf of the state of Missouri Republic Services. Okay, it's based on odor and nuisances, and the form that you fill out up here, the form and the phone number, that's how you report the odor. That's used as evidence in this court case. Okay, every single odor report. If you smell it at 8 o'clock in the morning and you go back out at 9 o'clock at night and you still smell it, please fill it out again. Okay, you can't fill it out too many times, basically. The more they have, the better picture they can paint. The other thing that's important about that is, you've probably seen recently in news articles where Republics claimed, well, it's not us. We're not the cause of this odor. Listen, if 20 people in Spanish Village are saying they smell the odor, then it's easier to prove than if just one person says they smell it. Does that make sense? So you really, I know it's tedious, like she said, we're working on a way for maybe an app on the phone. If there's anybody that's IT friendly out there, because we're not very good at computers, anybody that has any suggestion for that, please come see us after the meeting, because there's, we happen to think too, there's got to be an easier way to report this than what's already there. January 9, 2015, there was a court date in St. Louis County. The Attorney General is concerned about, in the state of Missouri, are concerned about rising temperatures in the North Quarry. He requested that 2 TMPs be moved north to the northern portion, and we have a map coming up to show you where those are. And one of the biggest things is he also requested further testing for the extent of radiation at this landfill. If you guys have heard anything about the barrier, then you know that they've done some testing. They were trying to figure out where to put this barrier, and as of right now, they still don't have a clean line. Every place that they're testing, they're finding radiation. In the beginning, when we first started this a couple years ago, they had this really great map of West Lake, and they had 2 areas on that landfill that they said, well, this is where the radiation is confined to. Now, 2 years later, we don't have that anymore. In the one area, actually, I don't have my pointer, but up here in the North Quarry, see that little outline, that purple outline right there? That was 2 years ago where they thought that the radiation was confined to in the North Quarry. Now we know, if you can see that, see the red line where Ed is? Oh, thanks. Ed's got a pointer. This whole area right now, they've tested and they found radiation. So they're finding it where they didn't expect it to be. These 2 wells right here, where these 2 X's are, this is the approximate area that the AG was asking Republic to put new temperature monitors in. The temperatures are rising and the oxygen levels rising. Okay. This is, if you can see this area right here, and you see OU1, this area down here, this whole area down here, this is where the fire is right now. It's being held back, right along here, right in the neck area. Right here. You see it? All these little temperature probes and gas probes and gas extraction wells. This is where they're trying to hold it back. They're trying to keep it from moving this way up here. So I hope that that makes sense. If not, please see us afterwards, or please feel free to ask questions. These are some really great photos I wanted to show you. I don't know how well you guys can see them with the lights on, but if you look here, you can kind of see, do you see the posts here? There are these posts and these are cordoned off. You can see the rope that I'm outlining. This whole area here has sunken in. It's actually fallen in. This is a result of the fire. When the fire burns and it burns the garbage, it creates a void and it collapses. So this is one of the biggest things that they're worried about in the fire area is if this collapses and you don't have this cap on or the cap rips and oxygen gets in there, it can provide a pathway for the fire to shoot up and become a surface fire. You don't want this fire to hit oxygen. So that's something, when you read these DNR reports and they talk about subsidences, that's what they're talking about happening right there. Some more pictures. Some of these were taken, were posted on the Bridgeton Landfill DNR website. Some of those, the last picture was taken by a resident. If you can see all these little wells here and these lines, they're pumping gas and leachate. Everything at this landfill that was below ground, all the gas extraction systems and the gas wells, is now above ground because of the fire. So when you go there, you're going to see a tangled mass of black wires. That's what's going on here. Oh, yeah. We have to talk about this. The former DNR official issues open letter about handling a burning Bridgeton landfill. How many of you guys read that letter? Okay. Best that we know is, and obviously DNR, there's not a whole lot of comments coming out of them, but obviously Mr. Norris is speaking with the media. A former member of the Department of Natural Resources left his job and penned a letter basically talking about some pretty cozy relationships that exist between the company and some of the folks that work for the Department of Natural Resources. And he goes on to talk about cozy relationships, politics, not science, guiding decisions at the landfill. Talks a lot about the Kurt Schaefer amendment, Senator Kurt Schaefer, who also is running to be your next Attorney General, by the way. Conditions at the landfill, he says, are far from ideal. Communication issues remain. 97,000 in donations to political campaigns since 2014 by Republic Services. We're going to get to that in a second, as soon as we're done reading this list. Governor Nixon decreasing access to DNR staff. The letter's posted, and we'll get the letter, I think it's up on our Facebook page, isn't it? We'll get it up on our website as well so you guys can read it. I've not personally reached out to Mr. Norris. I know Ed has and some others have. But, if you remember back to the start of this landfill has been burning since 2010. And there was a gap. There was a time when nobody even knew that there was a fire up there, not even the fire department. When it comes to those cozy relationships, I have no doubt that that's probably one of the reasons why. We don't know exactly who at DNR he's referring to. The donations, it's the Missouri Ethics Committee, right? Missouri Ethics Committee. If you guys have never been on that, you need to get on that. If you know anybody who's running for political office, alderman, councilman, mayor, whoever it be, you need to get on that website and you need to look them up and see what they're taking. This company is spending a lot of money, and what they're mainly trying to do is they're trying to push the solution in 2008 to cap the landfill, which, by the way, the EPA put on hold because the EPA said, yeah, we need additional testing. So in rural Missouri, you guys may see online, they formed a coalition on Twitter. The Coalition to Keep Us Safe is what they're calling themselves. That is a fully funded Republic lobby group. that is going to Jefferson City and going all around, grabbing whatever representatives, mayors they can, and basically getting them to sign on to the 2008 Record of Decision. Now let me just take a second to say this. If you're in this room right now and you're worried and you don't know if you want it removed, you're in the right place. If you're in this room and you're not sure what should happen at the landfill, but you're tired of reading it on the media and you want more information, you're in the right place. If you're here and you're tired of living next to it and you want it gone, you're in the right place. There is plenty of room for people to agree or disagree about what's happening at this landfill. But I'm going to tell you right now, not if you're getting a check from Republic, okay? You don't get to take a check from Republic and then live in rural Missouri and say, nope, we think the best solution is the two. You know, I wish I could say that our allies here in St. Louis County and all the people here, all your representatives that are here at the meeting tonight, that that's enough. But the truth is, we've got some more work to do. We'll talk about that at the end. We need to get some more people on board, and we need to make sure that they understand that getting on board with this community doesn't necessarily mean getting behind removal. What it means is getting situations like this, getting behind this and fixing the communication between the state of Missouri and the EPA. The leachate pipe in the city of St. Anne. First of all, huge shout out to the city of St. Anne. They are the first municipality to host a public meeting where anything about this landfill was ever discussed. And they, yeah, huge. And they have the public services present. Now, we could not comment, but thankfully, Amy Pelker, I hope I'm saying your name right, you know, she allowed a forum online where people could submit questions, and then those were asked on behalf of all concerned residents. And this was open to not just St. Anne residents, this was open to all residents. This was a public forum. And we learned a lot of things there from Republic, but one thing we wanted to tell you is our next meeting, which is February 19th, we've invited MSD to come out. So MSD will be here. They are sending a representative, and they are fully ready to answer questions and get down to the nitty-gritty of this. You know, part of this format that we do here at the community meeting, we show you the DNR, we show you EPA, we try and show you all points of view so that you have everything that you need to then make your own decisions. So, you know, it's good to hear from St. Anne, to have the St. Anne folks here tonight, but it's going to be great to have MSD there to really go into more detail about how testing will be done on the pipeline and the leachate that's in it. Is this you?
Thank you, Dawn. My name's Ed Smith. I work for the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. We've been paying attention to the radioactive issues at this landfill long before the smoldering fire began in 2010. Is there anybody here for the first time tonight that's never been to one of these community meetings? Got a few folks. Thank you for coming. Bring a friend next time. So just a quick nutshell, then St. Louis purified uranium for nuclear weapons in secrecy during World War II for part of the Manhattan Project in downtown St. Louis, just right next to the McKelvey Bridge. Those wastes were moved around the St. Louis area from downtown St. Louis out by the airport along Coldwater Creek, then again to Laddie Avenue along Coldwater Creek and Hazelwood, and ultimately some of these radioactive wastes were illegally dumped in the West Lake Landfill in 1973. That's why Dawn was plugging the Army Corp of Engineers, what's called the Formerly Utilized Sites Remedial Action Program, FUSRAP for short. The Army Corps is currently in charge of cleaning up all the other radioactive sites in St. Louis that have the same radioactive waste at West Lake, because of related to nuclear weapons. The EPA, due to some bureaucratic shenanigans in 1990, decided to put the EPA Superfund in charge of West Lake Landfill. So this has really been a year of news for West Lake Landfill. By the way, Happy New Year, everyone. There's been news story after news story, and we're barely into the year. One of the news stories most recently was from the Environmental Protection Agency, which is overseeing the issues with the radioactivity of the landfill. And Tuesday of this week, the Environmental Protection Agency put out they did a press conference with the media over the telephone about their air monitoring data collected from May 2014 to November 2014. This is a map that kind of, here's the West Lake Landfill right here. We're kind of right here. These are the two areas of radioactive contamination that have been identified at the landfill. And then the EPA set up 5 air monitoring stations around the landfill, one in St. Charles, one by the Pattonville Fire Protection District headquarters, one by Robertson Fire, and then 2 over here again. So the EPA got their data going, like I said, May 2014 through, they're ongoing, but the data here is representative of that time frame, that 6 months of last year. So the EPA's conclusions were that the air around the West Lake landfill resembles the St. Louis metro area. Essentially, that what they detected at their testing sites was essentially the same as what they would find in St. Louis elsewhere. The air in Metro St. Louis is like any other Midwestern industrial city. The radiation levels are consistent with similar cities, they said, including alpha, beta, and gamma. And what the Environmental Protection Agency never once said, you can listen to the press conference on St. Louis Public Radio's news article, they have a link to it. The EPA never said that the air in St. Louis is safe, period. And that's because of the high ozone and other air issues that we have. We're consistently ranked in the top 10 for asthma. A lot of the just the geography and the geology of the site lends itself to having bad air, on top of being a huge industrial city, having lots of cars on the road from the highways, and being surrounded by coal plants. That's generally why we're seeing a lot of bad air. Administrator Brooks from Region 7 even said to the press that they're committed to addressing these air issues long-term with stakeholders like the Department of Natural Resources. I just wanted to point that out. And this is actually from the American Lung Association. For St. Louis County, you can actually go to the American Lung Association, find out what the air quality is like in your neighborhood, or at least in your county. And for ozone, St. Louis County got an F. So did the city of St. Louis. And for particle pollution, they passed. Further down, they detail air issues, but check out the American Lung Association's website. You can do this for any county in the country. So we have a few follow-up concerns based on what the EPA released as it relates to the Department of Natural Resources air collection data, which has been up longer, and it's actually closer to the landfill. I mean, what the EPA had to say, folks, is pretty darn good news, other than the fact that all of St. Louis has bad air. What we're concerned about, and what a lot of the folks in Spanish Village and Trailer Park have consistently come here and said, is we've been living next to this for 4 years. We don't know how much longer it's going to last. What's happening to our health due to the long-term chronic exposure to what are currently low-level exposure to things like VOCs, volatile organic compounds, things like that. So my organization, we're working on reaching out to health officials to look at the state's data, the EPA's data, for public services data. They just released a comprehensive air report. There's a lot of information out there, and we're working on trying to find some health professionals, and if you are one, talk to me and help us out. Don?
I just wanted to announce, I talked to DHSS today.
Can't hear.
Sorry.
I raised this question, Karen and I raised this question with Department of Health and Senior Services and DNR. You know, the levels are low, but there's a bunch of stuff in them. There's all kinds of different VOCs, which are called volatile organic compounds. And some of those are specific to this landfill, the hydrogen sulfate, the sulfides. And that wasn't included in EPA's report or their press release, by the way. We called them and said, why isn't this in here? This is the primary thing that's making up the odor. They have all the raw data. They didn't give it to us. They didn't give it to the Attorney General's office. So somehow we're going to get that data. But in the meantime, what he's worried about, the long and the consistent exposure to these low levels, the Department of Health and Senior Services is teaming up with ATSDR, Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And what they're looking at is they're looking at taking those compounds and breaking them into two different categories depending on which organ they target. And then coming up with a long-term exposure level, you know, kind of measuring it up against that. And it's ongoing, but it is something that they're concerned about too. So kind of what I want to say, you know, Ed's not the only one that's concerned about it. We're not the only ones, you're not. The state of Missouri and the Department of Health and Senior Services is worried about it too.
That's good news. We're going to work, this is going to be the year of good news in the landfill. We're going to try to find the good news and stuff. I'm being serious. So again, if you can listen to the EPA press conference on St. Louis Public Radio's article about this. It's on the West Lake Landfill Facebook page. The Missouri Coalition for the Environment's tweeted, and I think Facebook did. Anyway, definitely listen to it, and listen to how they talk about Missouri's air in general. St. Louis's air in general. The Environmental Protection Agency, last week I believe, yes, a week ago today, sent a letter to the respondents or the financially responsible parties, which for folks who aren't in the know, Republic Services, when it comes to the radioactive materials, is not the only liable company. There's another company called Cotter Corporation, which is a former subsidiary of Exelon Energy, which operates mostly in Illinois. Exelon Energy is the financially responsible party, as well as the United States Department of Energy, which gets back to some of those shenanigans from 1990 that I was mentioning earlier. The Department of Energy essentially didn't want to clean up West Lake because it was going to cost too much, and decided to defer the site to Superfund to make corporations pay for it, because that's how Superfund worked. And eventually the Department of Energy was told, no, you actually are responsible for this site financially. I believe they were told that by the Justice Department. So this site certainly has some history. The isolation barrier, this was in the news. Oh, actually, let me go through this, sorry. I'm ahead of myself. So the Environmental Protection Agency sent a letter to the responsible parties on January 15. They asked for more data. They reference a document in the letter they sent to the responsible parties. This letter was essentially in response to a phase 1 isolation barrier report that was put together by the responsible parties and submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency in December. The EPA has been a lot more active recently. We thank them for that. But a long-standing frustration that our organization has is the lack of the Environmental Protection Agency posting these very important documents on their website in a timely manner. So instead of talking to you tonight about what was contained in this document that the EPA has already reviewed from the responsible parties, we're telling you we have submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the EPA to get this document maybe in the next 30 days. So once we get that, come to the next meeting, we'll talk about it. So the EPA requested in this letter to the responsible parties for more radioactive testing along the North Quarry Wall and the base. So again, if you go back to the maps, we're talking, this is basically the North quarry wall. It's separated right here. If we had a better map, you would see that it's a topographical map. So basically these are quarries. There's a very steep drop off that was filled with garbage after all the rock was quarried out of there. So this is the North Quarry. They found radiological material actually outside of the fence line for operable Unit 1, Area 1, which is this area right here. They found radioactive waste almost all the way over here and some over here. And it looks like that where they thought it was, they certainly didn't know where it all was in 2008 when they made their record of decision, but they're still finding previously unidentified radioactive materials. So they're asking for more testing there. The Republic Services and Company proposed testing along the isolation barrier nearly over a year ago. And there was phase 1A, 1B, and 1C, and then phase 2. Phase 2 of this plan was to take actual core samplings of spots along the proposed isolation barrier line, where they would bring up soil, and the EPA is asking the responsible parties to basically put an addendum onto this phase 2 part with some of their requests about identifying radioactive wastes. And the EPA is also requesting samples from previous tests that contain radiological material to put it under, so they're doing an experiment. They're taking these radioactive wastes, they're putting it in a heated environment that tries to simulate the landfill, and they're trying to figure out then what happens to the radioactive materials when they contact elevated heat. I believe that the EPA's actions mean that they have put the cart before the horse when they said that there is no problem if the smoldering fire reached the radioactive wastes. They said they wouldn't be explosive, they wouldn't be reactive, but they didn't say they didn't know what would happen either. And it's clear they don't know what will happen. So it's a good thing that they're doing this. It seems a little late in the game, still happy they're doing it. So keep an eye on what happens here. And the community does not have an actual forum to be heard in what's happening with the isolation barrier. With Superfund, we have the opportunity to submit public comments on the record as a part of the remedial action at the landfill. The Coalition for the Environment, our organization, we did that and leading up to the 2008 record of decision. And we'll have that opportunity again once the EPA makes a final decision, if they make a final decision, because we would obviously like to see the Corps be put in charge in making that decision. So we will have that public opportunity in that forum to be heard, but for the isolation barrier, there is no community engagement, there is no legal public ability for the community to have comments heard. So what we're going to do is, with the community advisory group and with the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, Just Moms, we are asking folks to use this Google thing right here. I'm going to post it everywhere. I just created it today so nobody really knows about it. We are asking to hear from you guys about what your concerns are about the isolation barrier, what questions you have. We're going to work on developing a frequently asked questions for our website. We want to help disseminate information related to the isolation barrier for you all so you know what's going on, given the lack of community. Like I said, there's no community stakeholder process for the isolation barrier. So we're going to try and get your concerns heard, post that stuff on our website, especially for folks who aren't necessarily following what's going on. So if you have concerns, questions, let us know. You don't have to give us your name. It can be a silly question. If you think it's silly, it doesn't have to be a silly question. Yeah?
how do we know what's happening with it? Because every time you read something about it, it's a different story. It's working, it's not working, it's not long enough, it's too short, it's failing, but it's working great, and don't worry. So how is the average citizen supposed to know what's really happening if we're not getting the correct information?
Well, you come to these meetings first off, so you're on the right track.
I mean, who's in charge of giving us the right information?
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency is in charge of giving the public the information for the isolation barrier. So we're going to take your questions and concerns. We're going to send them to the Environmental Protection Agency, especially if we cannot answer them ourselves. And we're going to ask for them to give us a timely response, given that the public has no legal status at this landfill and they have the right to know what's going on. Like I said, they're reviewing documents that we have no idea what they say, even though they're referencing them in documents that they're releasing to the public. Like, that's a part of the transparency problem.
And why do we not have a legal right to know that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, the EPA is using a removal action, a time-critical removal action. So because this possibly poses an imminent threat, the EPA doesn't allow for that public participation.
Well, we won't be able to get out in time.
Well, I'll tell you this. This is an example of how to, I think, streamline the process. Is if the Corp of Engineers were in charge of the landfill under the FUSRAP, Republic Services wouldn't have as much influence over what happens. The EPA wouldn't have to wait for Republic Services to write a plan for testing. They wouldn't have to wait for Republic Services to write a plan for an isolation barrier. They'd be up there, they'd be doing the site investigation, they'd be writing the plan themselves, sourcing legal help or technical help from other core groups, because the Army Corps of Engineers has a lot of experts. That helps streamline the process, instead of all this back and forth nonsense with the responsible parties, which includes our federal government.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Also, well, I guess since we didn't meet in December because of the holidays, the United States Geological Survey was requested by the Environmental Protection Agency to conduct a groundwater investigation into what's happening at the landfill. And the USGS findings, I'm just nutshelling them here. 47 of the 83 monitoring wells at the landfill were impacted by leachate. That's the nasty landfill liquids that have become a nuisance for the landfill owner. They've been confirmed to be moving off-site. That's the reason for this pipe that's been moving from the landfill east towards St. Louis through St. Anne, which is why they had their council meeting on it. So the leachate's been moving throughout the landfill. There was elevated radium found in the wells with the leachate. So most of the areas where the USGS found elevated levels of radium, or some of the most of the same wells, where they were finding wells that were impacted by the leachate from the smoldering fire. And 20% of the samples between 2012 and 2014 exceeded the maximum contaminant level for drinking water for radium. Without getting into the weeds too much, the maximum contaminant level is 5 picocuries per liter. Many of the results were right around there. Some of them were 40 or so picocuries per liter. The reason that the radium in the groundwater is relatively important is because the EPA's 2008 decision only found 4 wells in the entire site that had radium above the maximum contaminant level. Now we're at roughly 20% of them. We've seen a significant increase both in the amount of wells impacted by elevated radium and a significant increase in the overall radioactivity of the radium. And one thing to remember is that the radium at this landfill is actually going to become it's becoming more radioactive right now. And it's going to continue to do that for 100 years, 300 years. It's actually going to keep doing that for 9,000 years. Because of the uranium purification process from the nuclear weapons development, has changed the balance of the thorium and the radium. So the radium, and this is not disputed science, is actually going to increase in radioactivity up to 100 times over the next 9,000 years, and it's already happening. So we're going to see radium increase over the long term at a landfill with no liner separating the radioactive materials from the groundwater. And so the USGS came up with 4 conclusions about why radium has been an issue at the landfill. The EPA bases these conclusions on the data they researched. They found wells that are outside of the areas that were originally contaminated or suspected to be contaminated with radioactive materials. One in the North Quarry, that they basically have confirmed is radioactive radium related to the wastes that were dumped there. Some of the wells, they're saying, may not be related to the radioactive waste that were dumped there. Some of it could be naturally occurring. And some of the radium could be from other sources that were not the radioactive waste dumped there from Laddie Avenue in North County. There's still a lot of questions in this USGS report. We're, again, working with some scientific friends to figure out what all of this means. And we're using the Freedom of Information Act again, because while the Environmental Protection Agency has posted the interagency agreement with the Corp of Engineers at the landfill, they have not posted publicly the interagency agreement with the United States Geological Survey. And that will help us know better what EPA Region 7 directed the USGS to do and what to look for, and that will help us get a better handle on what this report means and what we're seeing. And I'm finished.
Thank you, Ed. I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm Harvey Ferdman with State Representative Bill Otto's office. I just want to comment on 2 of the points that Ed went over. One of them really a critical point. Earlier he mentioned that the EPA has asked Public Services and the other responsible parties to do more testing for radioactivity in the landfill. Now, if you remember the picture, you have where the fire is. Thank you very much. You have where the fire is, this large area to the left. The center is the North Quarry, and then you have West Lake Landfill, where the so far discovered radioactivity is. That isolation barrier, if they end up having to dig to build the isolation barrier, is going to release a lot of odors. It's going to really put the neighborhood through somewhat of a hardship. And I think that they owe it to, the responsible parties, the EPA, owe it to this community to make sure that they have fully tested from the radioactive area to as close to the fire as they can possibly get before they try to start digging into this area. The last thing we want to find out is that they put the isolation barrier a little bit too far to the right and there's still some radioactivity between the isolation barrier and the fire. So keep your eye on that. If you talk to any elected officials, please tell them that you want the entire North Quarry tested for radioactivity, the entire North Quarry. Okay? Thank you. Question?
Ed, is there any, Harvey, is there any talk about testing this South Quarry for radioactive?
No, one of the problems is anytime you poke the South Quarry, and I'm not an expert on this, but anytime you poke that, you're potentially letting oxygen in to the fire, and I'm not sure if there's safe ways to poke that or not. But it sure would be nice to know. But I will tell you that there have been times when DNR and DHSS has gone over to the steam that was coming out when they've done certain maintenance things, and they've grabbed samples and they've looked for radioactivity in that steam and it's come up negative.
Oh.
Okay, but they have other monitoring going on, but as far as whether or not it's in that soil, we don't know. Yes?
Harvey, I have a question for you in regards to the sample.
I want to run through these events that are upcoming, and then you guys can ask all the questions you want. I just want to make sure that everybody hears the upcoming events before you guys take off out of here. There's a CAG meeting coming up on February 9th, which is on a Monday evening here at 6:30. There's a prayer vigil that'll be held on this coming next Wednesday on the 28th. And there will be a Ferguson Ecology Team Video Night on January 27th on Tuesday. And then we talked about the FUSRAP Oversight Committee meeting on January 29th. And you guys have questions now, you can ask away. But I'm not the right person to ask.
Karen? I have a question in regards to what Harvey was mentioning about knowing about all the testing done over all of the North Fork. And I recall some feedback back and forth on the West Lake Landfill Facebook page that was speaking towards don't do a step-out pattern like they had done before, and to press for a grid type of a system, and how can we make sure that that is followed, and how can we stress to them the importance of not doing the step-out? Why did it fail? How can it fix it? And why we should go for the grid. So I personally have my own feelings about doing a grid, because to me, I refer to it like an archaeological dig. You know how they are so precise. To me, a step out would be, we're going to do it here, we're going to do it there, we're going to do it here, with very little rhyme or reason to it, and that's why I've asked this question, for more clarification for myself.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I'm using in layman's terms, I'm saying to ask for the entire North Quarry to be tested. When you do a step out, basically, you go a little bit further than you expect to find something, and if you don't find something, you come back halfway. If you don't find something, you come back halfway. That's not testing the entire quarry. That's testing out to where you kind of expected not to find it. I want them to test all of it.
So do we.
Yeah, and if you talk to anyone, step out has failed 5 times to locate all of it. 5 times it's been done. But by multiple different agencies, which is interesting. The NRC's done it. EPA under different contractors has done it, and then Republic under different contractors, and each time they find a little bit more. So either it's moving, which EPA says is not moving, or well, who knows? But we need the entire North Quarry tested. The other thing I wanted to mention is in the 4 possible sources that the USGS pointed out as why the radium's in the groundwater, etc. I want to point out that the EPA accepted documents and studies from Republic Services and DRPs, the responsible parties, in the past, big, long groundwater study, in which they concluded that the radium in the water was not from the radioactive deposits. It was not from Area 1 and Area 2. Obviously, USGS has overturned that. They're saying it may very well be. This is a reoccurring theme with the way Superfund is working at this site. We keep having the DRPs do investigations. They come up and say, they can come back and say, no problem here. And the next thing we know, through your efforts and pressure on our federally elected officials, and that's where we're getting results. That's forcing, they are negotiating on your behalf, and they are getting other eyes on this besides the contractors from the PRP. They get USGS on it. They get the EPA Office of Research and Development on it. And what happens whenever we get outside eyes on it is they contradict Republic Services and the other PRP's studies. And they come up with things that start to smell like truth. So, thank you.
Yeah, and back to what he said, for those of you that are new to the meeting or you don't understand, why we come here once a month and we put the fire up and we put the radiation and what the big deal of West Lake is. It's been there now for over 40 years, guys. It's been up at this landfill, this radiation, for over 40 years, and we still don't know 1/4 of what we need to know about it. I mean, that's where we are as a community, and that's why it's so frustrating, like Harvey said, and like you heard Ed say, because of the lack of transparency with EPA, because you have the state dealing with the fire and EPA dealing with the rad waste, because you have Republic Services and Cotter Corporation and other PRPs. That whole thing, it's like a really ugly triangle. Getting FUSRAP involved at this site does not guarantee removal. I want to make sure you all understand that. Because that's what the other side's saying. Republic is saying, oh my God, don't get FUSRAP because it means removal. That's not the case at all. FUSRAP has removed all radioactive waste across St. Louis. They're doing it right now at the airport, okay? You know, some of the stuff like Weldon has been kept in place. There are other alternatives for this waste that don't require removal, but the important thing is getting FUSRAP involved eliminates this back and forth craziness. Plus, if anyone's familiar, the meeting that Karen just said, the FUSRAP Oversight Committee meeting, the engineers that work on these sites actually attend these meetings. And you can actually go up there and ask them, what are you finding in the creek? I mean, these are the people that are actually doing the work. What'd you find in the creek? What was it like to remediate it? What were the health risks? You know, they're on site and they're easier to talk to. EPA's in Lenexa, and it's impossible to have that kind of relationship and communication with them. So, any other questions, comments?
What does FUSRAP stand for again? I always forget.
Yeah, it's FUSRAP stands for Formally Utilized Sites Remedial Action Program. It is that's why we call it FUSRAP. It is specifically designed only to handle waste from the Manhattan Project. Does that make sense? It is a federal program because the purification of uranium and the transport of it across this country left messes in other places as well. Yeah, 350 sites across the nation. 350 across the nation are dealing with what we've been left with. It's a legacy issue. It's left over from the bomb. And the federal government recognized that they had a huge mess on their hands, and they created this program. What's important is that these people don't deal with like nuclear power plants. They only deal with Manhattan waste. These are the experts in this, and this is why we like them. This is Manhattan Project waste up here at West Lake.
So they just deal with that waste from the Manhattan Project, that company.
That's right.
That acronym you said, FUSRAP.
Right. I mean,
what did you call it?
And you know, it's like Ed meant to FUSRAP, and it's a Corps of Engineers, which is nice. You know, it's a core of people, of experts. You know, the Corps of Engineers, they work on levees, they work on many different things. So they have, you know, in situations like this where you have a landfill that's in a quarry that's next to a floodplain, there's a lot of different resources that they had to pull from. But the most important thing about it is that the company responsible, Harvey calls them the perpetrators, okay? The company responsible for the mess doesn't get to decide how to clean up the mess. Okay? When somebody, and you know what, that's fair and logic, okay? When somebody rear-ends your car, they don't get to decide how much damage was done to your car. You know, it's a messed up system, Superfund, and like Ed said, the community that lives next to a Superfund site, especially in what's happening right now, it's a time-critical removal is what they're calling it, we don't have any say. So what we can do is we have to sit back and we have to wait until they come down with a decision. Once they have a decision, then we get to make public input, and that's backwards. That's backwards of how it should be. Because we're the ones that are left to live next to it after the decision's been made. Yeah.
Back to the federal government level, a year ago we were all passing resolutions about getting this turned over to FUSRAP. And the federal government, our 4 federal representatives to Congress, the Senate, and the 2, my mouth isn't working, the 2 representatives were the key to this. Are they still the key, and what do they need to do? And I know one of them didn't want to do anything because, and I'll name names, Senator McCaskill at one time, because it was an earmark.
Right.
And she had promised that she wouldn't have any earmarks. So can you kind of tell us where that is, and why isn't it not moving along, and what can we do?
She said a year ago we were passing around resolutions for our senators and our congresswomen and men to move this, because they're the ones that can move this. They can move this tomorrow to FUSRAP, absolutely. We're still doing that. Here's the thing, and I'm just going to be I'm going to be blunt. That's funny because that's whose office I heard it from. Basically,
Blunt. Yep.
Senator Roy Blunt's office told us that the senators will move it when we're a pain in the ass. If we make enough noise, and when the senators get tired of it, that's when they'll move it. And that was literally what she said, and I still think that holds true today. You know, I know Senator our Senator Blunt will be running for office. These people, we need to be watching when they're in Missouri, and when they're coming to all these different election events, we need to be out there. We need to be out there with signs, and we need to be approaching them. You know, we need people to call their office every day and hound them. I mean, we did bird dog Senator McCaskill at Representative, now State Senator Jill Shoup's kickoff. She was going to be there, we saw that, and so we showed up, Karen and myself, and walked right up to her and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, you know, yeah, we really need to talk. We need to talk after the holidays and after the election." So we just sent a letter. The Franciscan Sisters helped us fax it, and we mailed it. They've received it, requesting her to follow through for a meeting with her, to sit down with her and to say, "Hey, this isn't working. This is not working. It's more complicated today than it was a year ago." And you know, we really, if you read the documents and you read the wording, it sounds as though EPA is getting ready to pass a decision sometime in 2016. And the reason that's a problem is because it's out with the old and with the new. When they pass a decision, that's their decision, and then there's going to be a huge turnover politically at Region 7. And then you're going to have somebody new come in, and then we've just wasted a bunch of time. So really, we have a year to either move it to FUSRAP or get them on the right, you know, on the right page. Because one thing that stands, if EPA passes a record of decision and then it's moved to FUSRAP, FUSRAP can only go and carry out that record of decision. Does that make sense? And we don't want that. What we want is the Army Corps to come in here and to have new eyes at this site. We want them to author and decide what should happen.
Carl's statement was to have a record of decision before he leaves
Right.
his appointed position.
Regional Director Brooks has stated he wants a decision in place before he leads, which is 2016.
Can I follow through with you, since you made that answer then?
Yeah.
Since they don't seem to be responding too much in any way, do we need to do something maybe where they see people that are affected? You know, videotape people that live in Spanish Village, or people that work over that way. I'm so-and-so, and I live with this every day, and, you know.
YouTube videos. I love it.
And
anybody want to volunteer?
You know, put faces on who this is. You know, otherwise we're just so-and-so they get a letter from, and, you know, you guys talk to them, and, you know, it's, somehow we need to do something different. You know, like you said, make enough noise.
It's not working with us talking, and that's the thing, you know. We've been making these phone calls all along, Karen and I have.
Well, you've done a wonderful job. I mean, but we need to do something else to help you.
Yeah, we definitely need your help. They're tired of hearing from us. They want to hear from you guys, and they need to hear from you guys. So that's a great
But putting a
suggestion.
face on it, you know, I'm so-and-so, I lost a child, and I'm so-and-so, my child is sick. I live here every day, and I have trouble with asthma all the time. I could do one about how my eye, when there's an odor, my eyes itch. You know, it's like, I finally figured that out. But there are a lot of things going on if we put some faces on it.
Make it real, make it human.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'm done.
So, real quick, so regarding the Army Corps of Engineers FUSRAP and having them take over the landfill, it is correct that Senator McCaskill thinks that this is an earmark and has been less than enthusiastic about introducing legislation to put the Corps in charge. But this is not a bridge to nowhere. This is a real community issue. And I will say that your resolutions that you did pass did make a difference. I work for the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. I'm a radical environmentalist, according to some folks who are involved in the landfill. And that doesn't mean that I'm in bad company. While we do support the removal of the radioactive wastes where possible, we also support the Corp of Engineers being put in charge. And the reason that the Corps being put in charge has gained traction locally is because a lot of the failures at EPA Region 7. They never considered a fire of any kind a threat to the radioactive wastes before deciding in 2008 to keep the radioactive waste at the landfill permanently. We have it on pretty good authority from a geochemist at Washington University who speaks scientific language better than me, that the way that the EPA has characterized the radioactive material has been incorrect. That it's likely that we would be seeing more leaching into the groundwater because of it not being leached barium sulfate. Now I'm getting a little too into the weeds. But there are several instances where we have seen EPA Region 7 drop the ball. The Post-Dispatch, when asked, Chris Koster, when asked by the Post-Dispatch, our Attorney General, how do you feel about the Corps being put in charge? He said we might have to rethink and redo everything if they're put in charge. That's what we need here. We need a fresh set of eyes looking at this landfill without the influence of the responsible parties. And your resolutions and that of St. Louis County Council, St. Charles County Council, the Pattonville Fire Protection District, DePaul Hospital, North County Incorporated, Franciscan Sisters of Mary, Pattonville School District, they all supported the Corp of Engineers, giving them the opportunity for this second look to redo and rethink what's going on at this landfill. And we saw action from our federally elected officials, not because of Ed Smith at the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, because these local institutions got on board and wanted to see the Corps put in charge. We didn't get all the way there. The EPA currently has 2 interagency agreements with the Corp of Engineers, one for technical support on the isolation barrier, and the other for technical support on the EPA's Record of Decision Amendment, whatever that may be. But the problem with the Corps' engagement on the Record of Decision Amendment is that the way that their interagency agreement was written does not allow the Corps, including FUSRAP, to go back and provide a critical review of the documents that were based, that the 2008 Record of Decision was based upon. So the remedial investigation, which helped characterize the site, the feasibility study about what should be what should be done at the landfill, should the radioactive waste stay or go, the baseline risk assessment, which includes how this radioactivity could move off-site and the risk to human health. These things currently, based on the interagency agreement, will not receive critical review from the Corp of Engineers. Only the documents post-2008 Record of Decision, which we believe was built on some pretty bad information, are going to get a critical review by the Corp. We want to see a full, beginning to end, no EPA influence assessment of what's happening at this landfill from the Corp. And currently we're not getting that based on the current interagency agreement with the EPA. Don?
I was referring to what Don said about the deadline and the change in EPA leadership in 2016. It kind of puts it all in focus now why there's this huge push from that coalition to keep us safe. Yeah. They have a timeline here, and they're trying to influence every possible political person in the state before that happens.
Right. Republic Services under Superfund literally has more influence over what happens at this site than if the Corp of Engineers, FUSRAP, were put in charge. They don't want to see the site transfer. They don't want to see a rethinking of the science. They don't want to see a reevaluation. They want the status quo that didn't consider a fire a risk. They want their report to hold up, which it currently is not, that there is no risk to human health or the environment should a smoldering fire reach the radioactive wastes. Thankfully, the EPA's Office of Research and Development debunked that report. And they're going to be looking into this further, I suppose. But yeah, you're going to see a pushback against transferring this to the Corp of Engineers. And let me dispel one myth that those folks have been putting out there. And that's that the EPA will do this faster than the Corp. Well, if we took 1990, ladies and gentlemen, as the benchmark for when the Corps started and when FUSRAP started, because those both started at the same time. We had the EPA v. FUSRAP and the Corps in St. Louis, in the St. Louis region. It took the EPA until 2008 to decide just to leave it there. 18 years. And now they're rethinking that decision. While the Corps, on the other hand, has studied their sites. Granted, West Lake's a little more complex, but they have more of the sites under FUSRAP. They've studied these sites, have figured out, and I'm going to have to correct you a little, Don, the Corps has decided to leave some radioactive wastes at sites that they deal with because they're inaccessible. But the Corps has removed over 13,000 train car loads of radioactive materials from the St. Louis area safely, 100% safety record, moved them to a sanctioned facility out west to monitor long-lived radioactive wastes safely. So if we're using efficiency in 1990 as a benchmark, the Corp of Engineers have been much more efficient at addressing their radioactive sites than the EPA at West Lake.
And they built Weldon Springs.
And they built Weldon Springs.
1.4 million cubic yards.
Yes.
Is there any update from the Republic or anybody else on how close the fire is getting to it?
Well, yeah, those are the two big uncertainties right now. We have a general idea where the smoldering fire is, and we have a general idea of where the radioactive wastes are. But we don't know exactly where either of those are currently.
So is there anything even remotely giving us any kind of idea that it's gotten to the neck yet?
Maybe we have some folks here that are better able to address what's going on in the neck than me, but I'm not sure what I did here. But basically, it's our understanding, the state's Department of Natural Resources has 2 landfill fire experts that they've retained to give them advice specifically on this landfill. And it's their conclusion that the smoldering fire is currently somewhere in, so if you're able to look closer, there's 2 blue lines right here that are shaped kind of like a V. And it's the opinion of the state of Missouri's landfill fire consultants that the fire is either within this blue line or just to the north of it, but still in the neck of the landfill. And it's our understanding, currently we have a better understanding, I think, of where the radioactive wastes are if we saw this document that EPA received in December. But the radioactive wastes are somewhere in this general area that are closest to the fire.
How far is it?
About 800 feet.
When you go on Google Maps and you can see Jupiter and something up in Jupiter, I'm not trying to be funny. How come we can't, or they can go to the depth of the ocean with a sonic and find the Titanic, you know, what was how many miles down? Well, I'm just asking science, how come they can't see with equipment? I mean, they just can't see where the fire is at all. That's why I get confused when you can see it, you know.
There are a lot of different indications about a smoldering fire, and we actually have a gentleman approaching right now that's much more informed on this issue than me, and that's Assistant Fire Chief Matt Luigi. Thank you.
I was just wondering why they can't see it.
Yeah, I'll just tell you what I know based on speaking with the landfill fire expert. And Ed's correct. The state has hired or retained 2 landfill fire experts. One deals directly with the fire and what's going on with the fire. The other one is a slope stability expert. So when you see the hill out there that kind of gets wavy and does everything else, that expert doesn't necessarily make comments on where the fire is. He's making comments on what it's doing to the ground and if the hills are going to cave in, slide out, things like that. Based on the latest round of data, and you guys all who've been here before have heard me talk about this, data is the #1 indicator of what's going on in the landfill. Well, prior to the holidays, when we had our last meetings, I stood up here and said that the data indicates that the heat front may have moved into the North Quarry, but there's no information to tell us that the fire itself is there. Well, in a very recent round of data we got, there were several wells that have indicated that the heat is higher than it's ever been before, and these are wells that are in this North Quarry, where you see it say North Quarry. We also had data that came back that showed for the first time ever in the data reporting that CO was present in the North Quarry. So if you sit here and you listen to what we have to say and you put 2 and 2 together, indications are that something is going on in the North Quarry now. And that's not what was going on the last meeting we had. Now, am I standing here saying that the fire is burning in the North Quarry? Like Ed said, we can't say that because you can't see it. You have to rely on data. And even people at MDNR, which we all know where our relationship with them is, has said, very high people I might add, has gone on record to say, I don't know if there's a fire in the landfill, not the North Quarry or the South Quarry, in the landfill, because I have never personally seen smoke or a flame. Now this is a deputy director of MDNR that has said that, and I heard Dawn commenting on it earlier when I walked in, and I apologize for being late. I had some things I had to take care of this evening. But honestly, looking at the data, and I've said this all along, we have to monitor it closely. Well, we're at a point now where we can't take our eye off of it, because when the data comes back that those CO levels are going up, and when we get a reading of CO, whether it's a little bit or a lot of it, somewhere in the area of those X's, which are by the West Lake Landfill, and which did indicate, not this last round, but the round previous, that there was CO present in there. Now, CO is a common gas that's given off during the oxidation, and I'm not saying fire, during an oxidation of a material, basically breaking down. But it's non-detectable in a landfill, it's supposed to be. You see low levels of CO when you have a rapid oxidation of a material, and by definition, a fire is a rapid oxidation of a compound that typically, and the word typically is important there, gives off heat, light, and smoke. That's the scientific definition of a fire. Well, the thing that's lacking at the landfill is oxygen to sustain that open flame, but we know we have smoke because we put a cap over the part of the landfill that has been burning for 4 years, even though this is a hurried process. There's a cap over it to collect all that gas and smoke and everything else that they ship through their pipes and they incinerate. Now the problem that I have is, and I think people have started to notice, is the smells seem to be coming back. Well, part of the problem, and this is just me speaking, I'm talking out loud, but this is what I think, is we had these same smells a couple years ago before the cap was in place. There's not a cap in the North Quarry. So while the company explains it as they're doing a lot of infrastructure work, which I'll give them that, they are. They're digging wells, they're putting in new TMPs, most of which they're being forced to do, or they're agreeing to it, so there's no further legal action taken against them. But what I'm trying to say is the beginning process of what we saw in the South Quarry, the beginning process is happening in the North Quarry. So we have to stay on top of it. We have to watch the data. We have to watch the temperatures, because they will even tell you themselves, after it was pointed out to them, that the data indicates that the temperatures were rising. Well, some of the things, and I've spoken with other groups, is, 2 rounds ago of data, we had temperatures in wells in the area. If you can point up here and actually bring it a little bit left, down this straight edge that makes kind of this big W, and that area there is where the fire was years and years ago. They had temperatures that reached over 800 degrees. Temperatures in this area started increasing, and they were getting to the point we were seeing some temperatures that equaled some of the highest temperatures we saw in the South Quarry. Lo and behold, the next round of data, those temperatures miraculously, I'll say, dropped off. Well, there's a way to control what the temperatures are, and their gas people are getting really good at controlling what their temperatures are. And I'm not saying that they're doing this, but one of the possible scenarios is if you have a well that's having 300 to 320 degree temperatures coming through it, if you turn off the pump that takes the liquid that flows in there and basically turn that off and allow that well to fill up with water, it's called watering in your pumps, guess what? Your temperature from, in a period of 24 to 48 hours can go from 320 degrees to 120. Just like that. So I'm not saying that's what they're doing. I'm saying based on the information I've learned myself and talking with a landfill fire expert who has seen this before, if you allow your wells to water in, you can control what the temperatures say. Again, I'll say it again, I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but there are ways to control what your temperatures are being recorded as.
You know, I've read a couple of books on landfill management, and that's part of the instruction. This is what you do. It's not like it's a sneaky thing.
Right.
It's part of the deal. It's part of their way of managing the draw and everything else in there. The interesting thing, when you pointed to that one spot there where the old fire was, isn't that highest testing radium well right there, that SS-101?
Yeah, I believe that that was pointed out, I think it was in an article that Harvey sent out to some of the groups. So, you know, I'm watching it very closely. I, along with Todd Thalhammer, the landfill fire expert, believe something is different today than what it was before the holidays. Do we think that it's in the North Quarry? It's very possible. We have to keep our eye on it. Are we ready to go on record and say that it's in the North Quarry? We can't, because we don't have the right data. If any of that all adds together, you understand what I'm saying. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you get the data to say that there is a smoldering event or an underground fire in the North Quarry, are you guys going to evacuate us and get us out of here because of proximity to the radioactive that's already been?
Well, we'll notify the public. And to say that we're going to evacuate you or require you to leave, we can't do that. It's your decision.
But you will notify.
We will notify you that it's to a point where we believe that the fire is in the North Quarry. I have gone on record on several telephone calls, and Harvey will attest to this. He sits on the Monday conference call with us every Monday. For the last month, maybe it's been longer than that, but for at least the last month, I have been asking MDNR and the EPA, because they sometimes have a representative on that phone call, to identify where the radioactive impacted materials are in the North Quarry, because I am not going to send a firefighter in to fight a fire that we don't know is safe for that firefighter to participate in that. And I get it, you guys all live here. I live here most of my life. While I might not spend the night here as often as you do, I am here quite often. So I'm being impacted by the same things you are. And I, in my right mind, cannot put a firefighter's life in jeopardy, just as like I don't expect you to put your life in jeopardy. So when you do get the evacuation notice, I would hope you would heed that and take that seriously and find a better place to be for the time being. But it has come down to the fact that now the EPA has come out and asked them to identify that, because we basically, the fire district, put them on the spot, and we told them, if a fire breaks out in the North Quarry, we're not sending our firefighters in there until you tell us where it's safe to be and where it's not safe to be. I hope that answers your questions.
I thought we weren't supposed to evacuate at the last meeting. I was supposed to shelter in place. I'm not being funny. They told me shelter in place.
I've heard shelter in place. I've heard evacuate. As I told Dawn, I told Harvey, I've even told Ed, I think it's going to be more of a planned relocation. Because you guys have to keep in mind, we're talking about low-level radiation. This isn't spent nuclear fuel cell rods. It's not Hiroshima that as soon as it happens, you guys are going to get radiation sickness. And I can't say you guys, us. We are going to get radiation sickness and die 2 days later. This is stuff that over a prolonged period of time is a chronic illness, and Dawn and I could live in the same house and be exposed at the same time after time after time for years and years and years, And I come down with cancer and she's absolutely fine. It's all the bodies, the way your own body deals with how they try to control and get rid of that thing that's not supposed to be there, if that makes sense.
But I didn't know what shelter in place meant. I didn't know what. I'm not trying to be funny.
No, and shelter in place might be the answer. If we have a surface fire on the landfill where we can go in and put it out, during the time it takes us to put that fire out, you may need to stay in your house, shut your doors, put towels around the windows, everything else, until it's safe for you to get in your car and go somewhere. So that's what shelter in place means.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, I heard here earlier, someone said, I don't remember who it was, that I believe it was the EPA is testing to see what will happen if the fire hits the radiation. Does that concern you at all, that now all of a sudden they're starting to worry about that when all these wells?
No, I think I look at that personally, and this is just me speaking again, I look at that as a step in the right direction. Before they weren't even going to look at what happens. They were telling everybody in this area, it's not going to get there.
Right, I understand it, but I mean as though it seems like, it's almost like now they have to, because it seems like maybe they're seeing more than what we're seeing, and they're getting worried about it too.
Yeah, and I'm on the same page with you. I think somebody, and I don't know if there's the contacts that we've had with the consultant that both the Moms group and the fire district hired out of New England. I've heard this from several different sources that if the fire reaches the actual radioactive material, nothing will happen. It'll burn the trash around it and that stuff will still sit there and remain. I'm going to tell you, I'm not a nuclear physicist or a scientist or anything like that, so I can't tell you, I'm going to go on record and say, no, it's going to be released into the air. But I know that there's somebody out there that does know the answer to that. I rely on a lot of things on common sense. And I know that if there's smoke and there's steam going around radioactive material, we're talking about particles that are the size of atoms. Not even the size of talcum powder, which I've heard, thorium been explained that's, some of the consistency of the material that's up there. You can't tell me that if it's impacted by heat and by steam and everything else, that it's not going to leave that property. But like I said, I'm not that scientist to answer that question. But I'll tell you what, if it is, and we know that radiation is being released, I'm not going to be anywhere around it.
Yeah, but the point is, I have a science background, and when EPA said that this is not happening, I could hardly believe my ears that they could say that unconditionally without doing the grid work that is done. When I lived in California, they did grid work on a land.
Now, I don't know how long you've been involved in this, but I can't believe a lot of the things that I've heard in the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, when they said that it's not there and it's not going to happen, and they didn't have, that really, I just couldn't believe I heard that without scientific backup. But anyway, that's just FYI.
I'm just glad to hear that at least, the fire department at least let us know. I at least appreciate you saying that. At least somebody's telling us.
I look at, that's our job. If our job is not the health and safety of this community, I don't know what else, I don't know. I'll quit tomorrow because that's what I signed up for.
It just seems like, all these agencies, everybody's in it just to cover it up and make money and sit back. And, out of every agency, honestly, I take my hat off to you guys because you guys have been the ones to stand up, in my opinion.
Well, I think it takes a team effort. I appreciate the comments, but I really do believe it takes a team effort. It takes the fire district, and not just the Pattonville Fire District. Robertson's right across the road. Maryland Heights is right down the road. Hazelwood's right here, St. Charles. These are all fire departments that if this thing happens, they're all going to be called into this and pulled into this. They're not going to have a choice. When our tones and when we're called to a scene, most of the time we don't have a choice to respond. We're going to show up, but if I put my guys in that situation without knowing, am I potentially killing them? That's not a spot that I want to be in, and I think somebody needs to answer for that, to be able to at least tell us what the risks are associated with fighting a fire on that landfill.
just talking about they're taking the soil samples with radiation and see what's happening under different temperatures. Like, how long does that take to figure out? Is this a 1 day, a 1 week, a 1 month, a 3 years?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I'm not the person to ask that. Tonight's the first time I heard that the EPA was taking portions of those core, and they're not samples, when they're digging wells, what comes out of the ground, am I correct? They're taking some of that and doing experiments with it? Yeah. Tonight's the first night that I've heard that, because I have been told that MDNR in the Attorney General's office and this community group has asked that the material coming out of the ground when they put TMPs in and when they put new wells in be tested, and they've refused to do that.
But it didn't say it was coming from the landfill. It was saying they were going to take they're going to take radioactive material they may already have in their lab and then test it like the landfill fires. Yeah. So I don't think they're going to actually dig down there and get it, are they?
They are. Oh, and they actually have these samples. Some of these samples were brought up during the original gamma cone penetration test.
Oh, well, that's
over a year ago, late 2013. So what the EPA is doing is requesting this material. I don't actually think that they own it. Based on the letter that I read that they sent to the responsible parties, they actually own it. So the EPA has requested to obtain some of these radioactive materials from the landfill so they can run some of these simulated tests to see what happens to the radioactivity when introduced to heat. There's no time frame on that. Currently, it's a request. It's not anything that it has been written in concrete as far as I understand. This letter was just sent a week ago. So again, this is one of those areas where the community advisory group can be helpful in getting us information about what's going on with the isolation barrier. I just thought of this, right? That's a good question. Is this experiment being done under the isolation barrier, or is it being done under the EPA's record of decision amendment?
Material that's actually there, because you could do radiation testing on radiation from a different area.
They're not doing it from a different area. They're doing it with samples.
Or a different time frame when it was developed, and not what's down there right this second. So if they're getting it from the landfill, then I think that's great. I hope that's where it's coming from.
That was my impression based on the EPA's request.
Okay, well that's great. It wasn't clear in that.
Yeah, and then the EPA generally doesn't offer timelines for a whole lot.
That'd be 9,000.
Yeah.
You're saying they're requesting from Republic, who owns the samples?
The responsible parties, so it'd be Republic Services, Exelon Energy, and the Department of Energy.
Given the level of mistrust, why don't they just go get their own sample?
Yeah, I don't think that they can. Again, this is why it would be great if FUSRAP were in charge. They wouldn't have to ask for permission. They could go do it themselves, and we would have an answer sooner than later.
I just don't understand why they have to ask permission. EPA should just be able. It used to be that way. I don't know what's changed.
I got a question, Ed.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the case, has anybody done any research to find out if it's ever been tested before at any other time?
Been tested for what?
Any kind of radiation ever been under heat like that? I mean, not necessarily that it's been this radiation, but any radiation put in any type of circumstance is likely to be tested for that. Does anybody know?
I don't think that there has. Again, this is a very unprecedented situation that we have here.
I know that, but I mean, just
it's not that the characteristic of radiation itself would necessarily change. It's whether or not it's going to become airborne. The particulates that you heard are some of them are very, very, very small. So there's some questions about will that become airborne?
If not, at least it'll be pumped down the rock road.
Shouldn't the first question actually be, why don't we just, shouldn't they just shut that place down? I mean, it's a safety issue. It should be an operating facility.
Well, it's not.
Either the state or the feds should shut it down.
Yeah, it's not currently being used as a dump or a landfill. It's a transfer station. It's a big parking lot.
They shouldn't be conducting any kind of business.
They pretty much have to keep our control.
No, I know that, but I'm talking about Republic should be using this as a transfer station.
mentioned.
Well, the transfer station is separate from the landfill. The landfill is the dome. The transfer station is not in the
It's all
oversight of the
side, isn't it, Matt?
What West Lake is a Superfund site, correct?
It's all What area defines a Superfund site?
All of it. I don't know if the actual road that goes into it where the transfer station's a Superfund. That's not something I've thought about before. So it's quite possible that the road for the transfer station is not a Superfund, and the areas where the waste was dumped previously.
It's my understanding that the areas that are impacted by the radiological material are under the oversight of the EPA. That's why the landfill itself is under the regulation of MDNR, because the landfill itself, until it's proven that there's radioactive material in there, if it ever is regulated by the state, and West Lake, who has the radiation, is oversight by the EPA.
Right, while the entire site
is a Superfund area.
The entire site is a Superfund area. The agreement was if there's radioactivity, it's under EPA's jurisdiction. The rest of it, because when it was first taken over as a Superfund site, it was still an operating landfill. EPA cut an agreement with the state of Missouri for them to go through the regulatory process to shut down the landfill and close it, which is a complicated issue that changes from state to state, so they kind of drew their jurisdiction lines.
And that's partially true. The reason that the landfill stopped taking waste in when they did was because of FAA regulations in the airport. Otherwise, they wanted to continue building this mountain of trash higher and be permitted and everything else through the state. So in 2004 was the last truckload that they took in. It was because the rules for the FAA changed. And it said that no landfills that produce or operate within a 10,000 foot perimeter of a major airport. And that's because of the bird strikes and everything else. So if it weren't for our airport being here, then this landfill could possibly even be open today. And they could still be putting trash in there and finding places for it.
Scenario, burns the trash and it'll just keep piling.
But honestly, that was one of the first questions that I asked when we first became involved was, what urgency is there to extinguish the fire? Because if you can allow the fire, the trash that's there to be turned into ash, couldn't you just open it back up and put more trash in it? And believe it or not, some people, I was told by the person that was in charge of Republic's landfill at the time that they had thought of that. And then I was informed that this is why they can't, because the FAA, and that came from MDNR, said they can't be permitted to reopen, even if that thing goes all the way down to rock quarry again, they can't put trash in there because of its location to the airport.
Because of the birds and the...
Yep.
So Matt, we all kind of talk about the radioactive waste all the time, but we don't mention much about the hodgepodge of chemicals and other dangerous things that are in there. As firefighters, can you maybe tell us a little bit about your concerns? What are some of the things that are in there that will create a concern when you have to go up and fight fire?
It is a hodgepodge, and it's almost like going into any home that's on fire. We don't know what's under the kitchen sink. We don't know what chemicals people hoard in their garages and everything else. That's why we wear equipment that protects us from most everything. It's why we wear the breathing tanks on our backs and everything else, because we try to cover all that. In this particular case, we don't know. We know that there's industrial waste there. We know that they took stuff from the Boeing company or McDonnell Douglas back when it was in operation. A lot of the stuff is documented, but a lot of the stuff isn't. So while we don't know what it is, we have protection for our firefighters as far as the gear that we wear, the respirators that we use to breathe, and it'd be no different than, if we have that stuff on. The thing that is in play with this situation that's different than everything else is the radiological material. So, there could be anything. And you can't convince me that whoever sat in the booth when a truck drove by every day after day after day asked that person, bring it in. What do you have in the back of your truck? I know it didn't happen, but a lot of it, I can't say most of it, I believe a lot of it was documented, at least when they took in the industrial stuff. Yes, sir.
What about as far as the police department? What do they do?
They will lock the roads if we ask them to. I'm not trying to be funny. I mean, they participate on the Monday call, because if there is a situation, they're going to have to be informed as to what's going on and have a background to that. But as far as, you know, the police being involved in this, their involvement, to be honest with you, is about as much as the fire department's is at this point, because we're not on the site every day. The last time we were on there for an emergency was last February when they had the surface fire on the south slope of the South Quarry. And that would be it. So, yeah. I hope that we don't ever have this again. But like I said, we rely heavily on the data to predict what's going to happen. And when you have temperatures at the 9-foot level on TMPs, it's highly probable that at some point this is going to happen again. You know, they replace pieces of this green tarp constantly, and I don't know the frequency, but I'm told that when they cut the piece out that they're taking out and it's thrown away, the underside is completely turned brown because of the heat that it's being exposed to. So the stuff is getting, whether you want to say that the fire's coming up to the surface or the landfill is falling down into the fire, whichever way it is, the fire in the top of this thing is a lot closer today than what it was 5 years ago in 2010.
That call you guys went on there, was that just a combusted because of it being, because whatever was coming up caught a spark and blew up, or do they know actually what caused it?
Well, we were told what they believed happened. This situation, this holds true today. The plan for the fire department response is to go to either a gate that's just a little bit further west of this, or the one on the other side, which is on St. Charles Rock Road, and wait for a technical expert from the landfill to show up and guide us either into the area or give us an explanation of what's going on and what they're doing. So right here, this picture, while you don't see visible flame, you know that something's going on there, and there is a large amount of toxic smoke. And I want to clarify, smoke is always toxic. It doesn't necessarily have to be coming from a landfill, but there's a toxic smoke leaving the property, heading over a public road. The technical experts, even at this point, were not on the scene yet from Republic. So we sat in this area until the wind shifted that day. Then we went to the other staging area, and probably about 3 hours after the original call for this, somebody from Republic Service showed up after somebody finally from MDNR was able to get a hold of them because they weren't answering their phone. When they showed up, they talked to us, they went into this area, talked to some of the technicians that were on the scene in that area, and what they did was they covered this up with a bunch of dirt to put the fire out, which is the proper extinguishment for landfill fires in most cases. But what that did was not allow us to do any type of investigation to determine what was the source of the fire, where the ignition source came from, what was involved with burning. They told us that a hose had come loose off of a pneumatic well. And if anybody knows about air compressors and things like that, that's what makes these wells drive up and down. They use an air compressor that pumps air to it. Well, you have to remember that air that's in an air compressor is air. It doesn't burn. The oxygen content is 19%, just like room air that we're breathing right now. That's not enough just to burst into flame. So even if an air compressor hose came off this well, was underneath the tarp, built up, bubbled up, and hit something that had an ignition spark or was hot enough to trigger a flame, there had to be something else there besides air, ambient air, to cause this to burn.
I have a question. How exactly can they keep the fire department off of it? EPA keeping you from looking at it? Or is it, are these safety issues? What are they using?
No, you know,
Actually going on there?
if this thing were blazing, we would have not stayed out of the fence. But by the time I was one of the first officers to arrive on the scene. Our battalion chief was there within 3 or 4 minutes. And the ball of fire that produced that big column of smoke was reduced, and it was smoldering. Basically what was burning at that point was the cap, that green membrane they put over it, was smoldering and kind of had a little bit of flame and everything else. If that were still blazing and there was a gas line that went or something and it was impending danger to that community because of what was being released, we would have put that fire out if we needed to and tried to control the release from wherever it was. We would have gone onto the property and taken care of that at that time.
I just it seems kind of, I understand you guys not want to go there obviously for safety reasons. I'm assuming probably the biggest reason.
But we have a policy now, I will tell you this, that none of our firefighters or apparatus will go anywhere on the landfill itself. So we know where their border roads are, but we will not take a truck or send a firefighter up onto that hill. So, and they know that.
See that scares me because, you know, I live right in the Spanish Village. That kind of scares me a little bit because who are we relying on to put it out if it does happen to them?
Well,
it seems like it's in their business.
Putting somebody on the hill and lobbing water at the hill are two different things. So, you know, the Attorney General met with us probably, it was before Christmas, so it's more than a month, but, you know, there are pieces of equipment out there, they're not cheap, but they do make industrial pumpers, is what they're called, and they can flow up to 5,000 gallons a minute of water. And none of the trucks we have around here are capable of doing such a thing, but the landfill fire expert has recommended that the Attorney General go after Republic, I don't want to use the word go after, but try to get Republic to step up and buy something like that, so in the event that something were to happen where we can't reach it with our conventional methods, we at least would have something to try to put the fire out. Now that's if the fire's in the dead center of the landfill. You know, in this case here, we could have knocked this fire down from the road without even being on their property. But, you know, that's just one of those things. Yes, ma'am?
Is there any data of the people who work for Republic day in and day out on that green part? Do they have regular health issues, or do they have regular doctor's visits to monitor their health?
That's a great question. I've actually thought that same thing because I do a lot of thinking on my drive in and to home in the mornings, and I thought the same thing. I wonder what the cancer rate is at that office building.
Is there any way to get an answer for us?
Well, the problem is it's a private company. If they were a public company, yeah, you could go in and request their medical, not necessarily their individual medical records, but you could request information on that. They're privately owned. So, I mean, no more like I can come to your house and tell you I want to know how many people are sick in your family. We're not going to be, they're number one. Number two, they're not going to offer that information on.
It's all projected. You know, they won't give it out without a court order.
You know, told us that they don't, you know, that the workers are wearing.
Yeah, I can see them.
Any kind of safety equipment you see in your house.
Well, the workers.
Yeah, I can tell you the day that picture was taken, the people that came in to work on the infrastructure after that were wearing gas detectors. And they were going off the entire time that they were working around this area without any type of respiratory protection or anything else. So yeah, they had the equipment to tell them that the CO levels were high and the VOCs were high and possibly the O2 levels were low, but they weren't wearing anything to protect themselves from what those alarms meant.
Do they speak English?
So yes, they're speaking English.
Oh, well, that day I believe they were.
Mayor, are they doing anything more about the evacuation plan in the county? Or anybody trying to piece something together, or is that sort of on the back burner?
The last time that, and I have a meeting with the LEPC next week, Tuesday, and I'll definitely ask if there's anything else being done. But what the county had come up with was like this lady here said was the shelter-in-place plan. You know, and I was part of coming up with that, so I don't want to sound like I'm bad-mouthing her or anything, but like I said, I think it's going to be more of a organized relocation than an evacuation. I think evacuation is not the correct term to use with it. And the reason I say that, because I see people look at me like, well, yeah, right, okay. The reason I say that is, well, we're going to know, at least I'm going to know, because I look at the data. And when the data tells me that there's temperatures over 350 degrees and the alarms are going off, that there's a problem with the air quality in the area, we're going to have that information well in advance of it being a big problem. We get the data monthly, and like I say, each month is getting a little bit worse, but it's not to the point where we're ready to pull that trigger and say, it's not safe for you to be here. You know, and you guys have heard me talk about in the past, when to say the word evacuation means a lot more to people that aren't able to be easily moved than it does the people that are in this room tonight. If I call for an evacuation, it means DePaul Hospital is going to shut down and start having to find people that are on life support places to go.
That's what I'm saying, you got DePaul Hospital right there, don't freak out.
Yeah, well, not only will they freak out, we will have more people die because of that. Pulling them off of the electricity in DePaul, putting them in an ambulance and taking them somewhere else, than quite possibly what would happen if they were exposed to low-level radiation for a period of 10 minutes. Does that make sense? I mean,
Well, yeah, they don't evacuate big hospitals unless there's a really danger called by, you know.
Right, but what I'm trying to say is there's no gauge on that level of danger. It's either you need to get out of the area, or it's okay to be here.
Is there been any talk about say, Republic doing any training for the fire department about this? Bringing someone in who would be able to tell you guys what to do?
Yeah, we have actually had that training, and I know it well enough that I've actually taught that training with the individual who's under state contract for the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. So.
Has there ever been any talk about anybody like representing the fire department being there on site ever? Has there ever been talked about, or is just you guys actually having a representative to be there?
I used to be invited to those meetings, but I was told that my comments were counterproductive because I questioned some of the things that I heard coming out of people's mouth. You know, when they talk about, and I'll give you an example, when they talk about putting in new wells or new TMPs in a landfill that goes 280 feet deep, and the first time we talk about it, they say there's 3 digger wells or well diggers in the country that can get to the depth we need to get to. Then you come back the next month and say, well, the plan is we're going to put these new TMPs into a depth of 120 feet because we can't find a well digger that's deep enough to go all the way to the bottom. So, yeah, I question that. So, in so many words, not only was I asked not to come back to their meetings, they also sent a letter to my board of directors and my chief asking me to be removed as the liaison from the fire department.
I remember that. I applaud the chief for not doing that. But my question is there no law that would allow you to go in there? I mean, I own a company and the fire department's able to walk in my business anytime they want.
Yeah, we can walk in and do a fire inspection anytime we want, pretty much.
And I guess that's what I'm saying.
The problem is what's customary and what would be considered harassment. Now, there's also an issue where we have brought up, and I looked at these issues with our lawyer and everything else. If the fire department wanted to legally challenge the MDNR and the EPA, because, and at this point we're not ready to do that, but legally we could file an action in the court of law to basically say that we don't believe that the MDNR is doing the right thing, and we want a judge to decide whether or not we can take over the jurisdiction jurisdiction of that site. But right now, while it's in our fire district, by state statute, it's regulated by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. So for us to go in there, right now would be counterproductive. And then I would say that would change if they stopped giving me the data and allowing me to review what's going on that landfill, to where if we were in the dark, so to speak, about what's going on, we would file suit to say we need to challenge the jurisdiction of this.
I think my biggest problem is, why does the EPA have a problem with you guys being there? You think they?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's the EPA. It's that it's the owner of the landfill.
What EPA is they can't tell EPA to leave. So I mean, I don't understand how they have the power.
That's because there's a law that
any government
is in place that allows the EPA to have oversight over them. It's a lot of information to take in at one of these meetings. But you can Google, or whatever search engine you prefer, Superfund. And it will explain to you, and it's a lot of reading, but I've had to do it myself, and it will explain to you the laws that govern Superfund. And it's exactly what these guys have said, is the difference between FUSRAP and Superfund is their oversight. They have no authority to force anything with the potential responsible parties.
Unless it's an emergency action.
Unless it's an emergency action and they've not been pushed to that point yet.
The only reason why I said that is because I've always had under the impression that, fire department is like God Almighty when it comes to safety in a business or stuff like that. That's the only reason why I say that. You know what I mean? I didn't know if. I guess maybe that's,
Yeah, well, I can tell you this. Our budget is in the millions of dollars a year. Their budget's in the billions. So there's your difference.
Councilwoman.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering where OSHA is involved in all this. Because
Well, we went to NIOSH, the fire department did. And NIOSH is a division of CEC, because early on I wanted to know what are the health risks, not for the community, but for the first responders if something happens on the landfill. Now they reviewed what the current conditions were. It wasn't fire situation, it was what's going on. But the problem is that their review was based on the same documents that the EPA looked at to say, leave it in place, the 2008 decision. Since all of that has happened, we have found documents, and it's been pointed out, I think everybody knows, that what's on the landfill is very different from what the documents say is on the landfill as far as the radiological material. So, yeah, we went to NIOSH, they looked at it and gave us, I think, a 9-page document on their health survey or their safety survey, but
should they also be checking the landfill for their public employees all the time? You said there's CO2 on there and they're not wearing masks. Seems like that's unsafe work conditions to me.
Regarding OSHA, our organization is very bullish for the environment. We've asked them to go out to the landfill. The thing with West Lake is that the conditions can change quickly. For folks that live around here know that. So it can be terribly awful smells 1 hour, the next hour you wouldn't even know that there's a landfill. So when OSHA, besides the fact that they're on a shoestring budget like most of our federal agencies these days, they don't have a lot of resources just to hang out at the landfill. So at least the last time that I talked to OSHA, they went there, they didn't really find a problem. But again, we've been getting really good at using the Freedom of Information Act, and somewhat recently got about 500 pages from OSHA regarding their reports both for the Bridgeton and West Lake Landfill from 2010 through 2014. So we're digesting a lot of that, we're looking through it, but we have it, and we're sharing that information with some folks.
You got 4 years to live through?
Okay, sorry, it's getting really late. So, if you have questions, come back again. Our next meeting will be February 19th, same time, 6:30, right here. And if you have any questions about any of the other events that are coming up, you can ask one of us, or we'll have just a couple of minutes here cleaning up and stuff. If you have questions, you can ask. So we will see you all in February.